I'm Sue Curlett. I'm going to be your host today, along with John Smith and Tim Schatzberger with Healthy Homeland, Well and Septic / Homeland Environmental / Tim Well and Septic.
It all works.
slash help us out
It
when
all
we're
works.
stuck.
I like to see you struggle.
No, there's a reason. There's a reason that I can say all those names because I've known Tim for 20 years. Like in August, it will be 20 years, and Tim was my first well and septic inspector. And I don't even think you were in business for yourself then, Tim. Is that?
By the time
Has
I
it
met
been
you,
20
I
years?
was. So I've got 20 years coming up in June.
Okay. Right, and I'm August, so that's kind of funny. But yeah, so we're gonna celebrate that anniversary together. Um, Tim is the owner of that company, and he has done well and septic inspections for the last 20 years. He's my go-to guy. He is probably the largest company in Maryland now, in doing well, septic, and now
Yeah,
radon.
we do
Right?
radon, and we also have a mold investigator. So we kind of have a mold division as well.
Nice.
Good.
Okay. Wonderful.
It's the nasty
Well,
M
John,
word, Tim.
Everything we do is nasty.
yeah, that nasty M word, which you've learned a lot about, I would imagine.
Getting into mold, I thought was kind of a simple, science, and getting into it's more vast than anything else we do, and that's why our septic inspectors don't do mold. We feel it's just too much of a knowledge base that you have to have that expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Are you guys doing any treatment, or are you just doing the inspections?
So, we advertise ourselves as neutral third-party inspectors. We do offer maintenance plans for homeowners, both on the well and septic side. So, if anybody's interested in that, that's great. And, so as you know, the market's been down for us in the last couple of years. And beyond that, some people have not gotten inspections. So, companies like ourselves are looking to adapt and reach a customer base outside of real estate, but not change who we are at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to say on this podcast publicly that if you skip anything, buyers especially, if you skip any inspection on your purchase, when my granddaughter was born, I had my water tested, just to make sure that she was drinking healthy water. Yeah. And I think that's basically because I've seen so many wells come back really bad. Tim, tell us a little bit about what you can see in water. Like what should people be worried about in their drinking?
So that's kind of the funny thing, right? What you see when you tap it, a lot of times it's clear and it looks great. And, sometimes you can get a false sense of confidence. I will tell you, we have Homeland Labs. So Homeland Environmental and Homeland Labs are two separate companies, but Homeland Labs is owned by Homeland Environmental. Okay. Basically helps us facilitate the sampling side. We get a lot of customers, homeowners that walk into our lab and get sampling. It's usually when they're expecting a child or grandchildren, because small bodies get affected more by this. And just to throw a few out, especially in the Carroll County area, one is lead. Lead's still around. It's in drinking water, unfortunately. So that's one big thing we like to test, especially when young bodies are involved. And something that's a little bit more unusual is road salt intrusion. And this doesn't affect every property, but if you're along like a major roadway, specifically county or state maintained, they're heavily salted. And if your well is kind of within that, let's say 150-foot vicinity, chlorides can be in your well. And again, there's some health effects to that, but the bigger health effect is that chlorides are corrosive and they tear that lead and copper and other metals into your drinking water. So it's kind of, again, you can look at your water and it looks great, but you take it to the lab and you get some other answers sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good point. The close to the road.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, guys, when you're talking about your water, your drinking water, you're really talking about the health of your family. So it's nothing to shake a stick at. I have never, I can tell you in 19 years, had a buyer purchase a house without a well and septic system inspection if they had one. And I have always used Tim's company. So I don't mind saying that. I will put it out there. If you're using somebody else, you're probably sending your stuff to Tim to test. Might as well cut through the third guy.
And, there's something that I like to get out is that there's a Safe Drinking Water Act, years old. I believe it's from the 90s. And that requires that all these public water systems like, Westminster City and Baltimore City, they all get tested by regulation. But if you're in a well, you're not. And it's really up to you to decide if you want to test for that or not. So,
I want to ask this question of Tim. So, and maybe I'm overthinking this, but let's say I live in a rural area and I've been there for years and there was a farm across the street, big farm, and now it's a home subdivision. Um, should I retest because now they're pushing all the dirt around, and they may have those silt fences, but who knows what gets leached into your well?
Yeah, farms, tend to put down a lot of nitrogen, right, and fertilizer and so forth.
Yep,
The correct answer, or I should say, the answer from the EPA would be, hey, get your water sampled every couple of years, so you kind of
exactly.
Yeah.
catch all that stuff. But yeah,
Right.
anything that changes is a good idea. When I have home buyers, right, like sometimes a farm conversation comes up when we talk about nitrogen. Another interesting one is if you're near a golf course. They also heavily nitrify,
Oh,
but they also put a lot of
Yeah,
pesticides down too. And pesticides is
exactly.
one of those things I really don't tell people to sample for unless they're really close to a golf course.
That's good. That's a
interesting.
good point.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I mean, I would have never thought golf course. So, and that's what this podcast is for, guys. We are out here to educate not only realtors that are going to be in this industry, but buyers and sellers.
Yeah,
If you want to know everything that we know, listen to this podcast. That's our goal. We're going to educate you. We're going to bridge the
right.
gap between buyers, sellers, realtors, home inspectors. It doesn't matter. Whoever you are in this industry, we're going to bring you on. We're going to invite you, and we're going to ask you all the questions. So Tim's sitting on the you're in the high
I
seat
love
right
it.
now, Tim. You don't realize it, but we're in a bad attack. What do you think? So now, Tim, I just want to specify and tell me if I'm wrong. You guys do not do any treatment. You only do the
We only do the
inspections.
inspections. Now, there's a little bit of caveat to that. Where again, in the last couple of years, as we try to adapt, we have a lot of licenses to do these inspections, and one of them is licensed pump
Right.
installer, which is very hard to get, but it allows us to replace pressure tanks, for example. So that is something that when we have a
Okay.
homeowner client and they ask us to do stuff, we do say yes to some of that stuff now. We never
Right.
want to
Okay.
overlap it with a real estate transaction because we feel that neutral third party designation is really helpful when a seller is mad at us, right? Like, you failed
Yeah.
the system, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, well, hey, we don't make money off the repair, and this is why we did it. And it
Right.
tends to bring people together a little bit easier.
Right.
And it's really one of the reasons that I've never left Homeland Well and Septic. I mean, I really haven't, or Homeland Environmental. Another reason that I don't, and I will, put a shout out to your staff, is they're so good. You know what I mean? I can call his office guys, realtors, at any time. And one of the young ladies that are in the office is going to answer my questions and take care of whatever my needs are. So, shout out to those guys. And then also Eric and all the guys that are in the field are incredibly professional. They put tarps down. There's no kind of waste or anything that's left for the homeowner to come home to. I've never had a complaint from any seller when my buyer is doing these inspections on the inspection. So, cheers to that. Not that we want to, just promote Homeland Well and Subject, but at the same time, these are things that you should be very proud of, that you can be very proud of, and that I want to make sure that I cover for you if you don't
No,
cover
thank
for
you.
them.
And we have
So,
30 some employees now, 10 inspectors, and it is something I'm very proud of. Not just the number of employees we have, but like you said, like
yeah,
we hire well, we train well, we have policies, and a lot of times, although we have 10 inspectors, a lot of times the customer doesn't realize that there's different inspectors coming out because the product a lot of times is very
right.
similar.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Tim, tell us where you service. So, what areas do you now cover? There you go.
Um, we cover really all of Central Maryland. We have a base in Taos, and that's
Okay.
where I work at most of the time. We have branch, I call them laboratories because we accept water samples there and process them in Forest Hill, Annapolis,
Okay.
and Waldorf. But generically, we go from Hagerstown to St. Mary's County to Easton and back up again.
Okay. And what about
We do
Pennsylvania?
cover the southeastern Pennsylvania, York, Lancaster, and Chester. And you could probably, if you need to go further, you can probably talk us into it.
Okay, excellent. Because I brought up Pennsylvania because I'm also licensed in Pennsylvania and I use you guys there. So I'm like, I know he does Pennsylvania. All right, now, John, what is your nightmare story? Well, septic, radon, doesn't matter. Throw it at him.
So, uh, oh, did you say Tim or John? I apologize.
I said John, but Tim,
Oh,
if you
no
got something
problem.
to say,
I,
jump
I
in
was
there.
going to say, shout out to Tim is what I love is, and I wish there was actually a database for us as agents to access it. But a lot of times during the, the pre-contract phase, I get inquiries from consumers said, well, how deep's the well? Well, I don't know, right? Or where exactly are the drain fields, or what type of system is it? I don't know. But if we get the contract accepted, we will know. And so my point was, you know, I don't know how you guys do it, Tim, but you guys show up, you got the well report, the septic information from the county, the whole 9 yards. And while we're standing
Yep.
around not knowing exactly what you're doing, we're able to share that information and talk about, oh, it was installed on this day. It's this deep. It was at that time, it was pumping X number of gallons per minute, et cetera, et cetera, which is a huge help because if you've never owned a property on well and septic, it's a real eye opener for the consumer to have access to that kind of information. I wish it was easier to get. I have some connections at a couple of the counties, but some of the counties are like, back up. You can't get that. You got to put in a request and blah, 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 blah. But you guys got a way to get it. I kind of know how you get it, but I appreciate that you get it. But I would say I have a couple stories. Actually, an interesting one came to mind when we started this session. Had a listing in Davidsonville, um, and house was great. They lived there for like 20 years, never had a problem. We get a fail on the septic. We didn't know what the hell was going on. Um, Long story short, they didn't know they had a distribution box.
Oh,
And so, they said, you've got a problem. It's full. The owner's like, I didn't know it's full. I get a pump regularly, whatever the deal was. And I don't even know. It was a while ago, 10 years ago. But believe it or not, the plumber found that box. We went through contractor after contractor after contractor, and they were ready to like cut bait, keep the house, whatever. And a plumber's
wow.
like, I know it's wrong. I thought the deal was dead. I mean, literally, we were sending releases, and the guy's like poking around in the ground, clunk, dug it up, jam
Yeah.
packed him. That thing was packed like concrete. Cleaned it out, cleaned the tank, the whole 9 yards. Came back, tested it 2 weeks later.
Good to
I
go.
learned that. I didn't know. Distribution box. Who would have figured?
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think, Tim? Do the distribution boxes between the house and the
It's
tank, right?
actually after the septic tank. So house, septic tank,
After the tank.
distribution box.
Okay. Now I learned that.
And it works to do what? What is its purpose?
So the purpose of a distribution box is to evenly distribute the water to the drain fields. And, I'm sorry I don't have pictures in front of me, but
No.
all the water from the
Okay.
house leaves the house, goes into the septic tank, usually in one sewer line.
Yep.
That tank, traps solids, lets the cleaner water pass through the distribution box. And then after that, like you might have 2 or 3 or 4 drain fields or 2 dry wells. In Maryland, the code is that each of those dry wells or drain fields has to get the equal amount of water. And to do that, a distribution
Okay.
box makes sure that if it's level, that each of those systems or each of those fields are getting the equal amount of water. And if they become unlevel, it's going to push all the water to one drain field. That's going to fail way before the other ones because they're dry. So it just ensures system longevity, I would say.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, there is certain things that we see as realtors, and when one of the things that we see is this beautiful patch of really neon green grass that is so pretty that you're like, wow, that grass is amazing, And after a few years of doing this, you start going, wait a minute, why is that patch of grass so green? And it is because it's being fertilized beautifully when that tank starts failing. So it is a red flag, but you don't always see that until it's way late, guys. You have to do these inspections way before you see the green.
Yeah, and then that's a good point. A lot of times when we find the problem, as you guys are saying, like sometimes we shock an owner because they have no idea that they have a problem.
Right.
The problems we find are a lot of times foreseeable. In other words, no, that home inspector or that homeowner's never experienced, a backup or any slow drainage.
Never. They never.
But we know from
Yeah.
absorbing, or looking at the system, the soil and so forth, it's going to go bad in a few months. And the science is not exact, but it's pretty good nowadays. And again, it's a big shock to a homeowner, but it's protecting the buyer. And I think, once
Yeah.
all the research is involved, the homeowner can kind of buy in like, oh, I get it now. But But that initial statement when you have to
Right.
knock on the door and say, "I'm sorry, we found a problem," it's not easy to handle because, as you said, when you open Sue, these systems are very expensive. We started 20 years ago; they might have been 4 or 5 grand to replace. Now we're probably looking
Yeah.
closer to 12 to 15. And the horror stories of
Yeah.
the 2 percenters where you might have to spend 30 or 40,000. And again,
Right.
that's not very often, but it does happen, and you have to understand that risk as a buyer because it could be you.
It could be you. And yeah, and so something to keep in mind as well is that the seller does not know. So the seller can't disclose this information. Nobody's going to test their septic system before they sell their house. They're just not going to do that. It would make no sense. Why would you inspect your septic system when you know it's going to be inspected again, shortly after you put it on the market? So it's really important to know the ins and outs of your septic system, of your well, of what your house is actually running on. Um, and I'll tell you, there was a story that I had where there was just odor. Like we were in the basement and there was bubbling in the toilets downstairs and there was like odor and we didn't understand exactly what was going on. And my buyer did hire the company to come in and do the well and septic inspection. And it was backing up, not quite into the house, but it was definitely on its way in. So, Tim, give us some idea on what we need to be listening for and like maybe what that bubbling either in the toilet or in the sinks, what does that
Yeah, so
mean?
no, good question. People ask me, "Hey, when do I know my septic system is failing?" You really can't unless you
Yeah.
start going in the tank, But the one clue that I do
Yeah.
tell people that you found out is when you flush a toilet and you just have a bubble come up after you flush it. It's this odd thing that
Right.
maybe just started happening. What that is every plumbing system has vented pipes, right, where air can go out the roof of your ceiling. What happens is when a system
Hmm.
starts to back up and the water starts to sit in a line that leaves the house, that air can't get up out of the roof and has to come up through the toilet again. So it's basically an obstruction of air.
Oh,
And if you can just imagine, there's just a lot of air pressure because the water's in there. And so that
yeah.
bubble is usually indicative of a line starting to clog.
Right. And we caught it. I mean, it didn't back up into the house because of the toilet
Mhm.
bubble.
I
I mean, that literally. So
I literally have
good to
one right
know.
now. It's not on the market, and they just replaced um, the pipes in the drain field for that very thing. Flush the toilet, run the sink, and flush the toilet, and the sink was
Yeah.
bubbling.
Right. Right. So when we talk about septic, guys, the one thing that I tell my buyer, and I learned this through Tim's company, is that there's certain things that you need to pay attention to. First of all, feminine hygiene. I'm going to talk about it because it's really important that people understand. If you live in the country and you have a septic system, okay, do not be embarrassed. I moved from the city to the county and I have a house that has a septic system. And it does take a little bit of adjustment for a woman to wrap it and put it in the trash can, okay? But you got to do that. It does not go in the septic system. It does not biodegrade as everybody says it does. And it's probably up there with baby wipes, right? Like as far as ruining your septic system. Um, am I
No,
right,
you're
Tim? Are
absolutely
those the
right. Yeah,
big?
the name of
Yeah,
the system is a septic system, which means it uses septic bacteria to digest the solids in between you cleaning it
right.
out. So if we're putting solids in the tank that aren't being digested by bacteria, they're either going to clog or just accumulate to the point where a pumper can't pump them out, or worst case, clogged or solids that get past the tank into the drain field. It's going to clog that even sooner. So yeah, it's going to cost you money if you're putting stuff down the toilet that doesn't biodegrade.
The
Right.
why these companies, baby white companies, says flushable.
Yeah, they're
So
not. Don't
I
believe it.
haven't looked at a box lately, but I will tell you there was a lawsuit to get the baby wipe
Oh,
manufacturers to take that off of their boxes where it says septic tank safe. It's
It,
safe where it's not putting harmful
wow.
chemicals in the environment. It's safe in that sense. But baby wipes, they
Yeah.
actually break down a little bit. Bacteria gets to them, and then they form together. Like it's almost like they break down a little bit and then combine together. Coagulation maybe is the word, and they form a
yeah,
blanket
Yeah.
of baby wipes. It's we're talking disgusting things right now, but we're also talking expensive things. It's not easy to get that
yeah,
out. And, you could have to
yeah.
replace a
Right.
tank. I've seen
Right.
that one time about 23 years ago where somebody had to replace their tank because they overused
We
baby wipes.
it this I have a story. It wasn't a
Yeah.
well in septic, but I'll tell you the story. It was in Baltimore City, and
Uh oh.
the toilet in the
Everybody,
basement
watch
backed up.
out.
We were running the water. They were working on the house, and the water started coming out of the toilet. And so we shut the water off. Everybody stopped using water. Had to snake the line, Tim, well into the street, well into the street
Uh-huh.
to fish a sock,
Oh
sock
God.
out of the line that was stopping us from getting to the main line in the street. A sock.
And, and this is why it's hard finding warranties for septic and sewer systems. You can find them in the city, but it's hard to warranty because anybody can put that down the drain and,
A Lego. It's like you got to watch your kids. You can't give them Legos and leave the bathroom door open.
My son, and this is probably one of the funniest stories. It's not really relative, but it's kind of funny. So I'm going to share it because if my husband listens to this, which he does not, by the way. But anyway, he hears all my stories anyway. So, um, my son, when he was like 2, put a brand new bar of soap in the toilet. And my husband thought he could go in there and like just snake it out. So he went to Home Depot, came back with a snake. He thought he was going to just fix it. He ended up having to shut the water off, take the toilet out, and came in with this bar of soap in his hand. And I was just like, what is that? And he's like, I guess one of the kids put some soap in the toilet. And I
They
was
were
like,
cleaning
oh
it. Come on,
my
Sue. He was
God.
cleaning it.
He was cleaning it, whatever it was. But I mean, if that wasn't one of those memories that go in the memory jar, that was definitely
everybody's
one of
got
them.
a sewer
Literally,
story. Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, like it was kind of funny.
You know,
But
the thing, and this is so important. That's why Tim's on. Sue and I talked about
yeah,
this a couple weeks ago, and I was like, we got to get a well and septic person on because people don't have enough knowledge about the well and septic. Sometimes they just get overwhelmed and shut down, but all kinds of things can be going on with the well. I will say that my son bought a house in outside of Brunswick, estate sale, and to get it, we had to waive it. Um, and knock on wood, the well was fine. The whole board had to be redone, softener, conditioner, bladder, the whole 9 yards. But we got lucky on the septic, though. But please don't waive these. As listing
no,
agents,
don't
don't
wave them.
don't encourage. You'll end up in a case before the commission, and we as agents, we can't say, well, I didn't know. That's not an
No, right.
answer that we can use. And I've been on 50, 60, 70 of these where one of Tim's guys have been there. I don't know. I'm not professing to know. I just
Right.
I tell the client, listen, be quiet, listen, and you'll get educated, and then you'll be able to maintain your systems as you move forward over the years.
Speaking of MREC, I had a conversation with them. I think it was last year around this time in April. They had some inquiries or some complaints from buyers who bought systems without inspection, and they bought holding tank systems. So let me explain that real quickly. What that is, you have a holding tank where a septic system won't work. So it's on a property that maybe is too small, but usually has just really poor soils where the water just can't absorb down. And a holding tank is basically, maybe 4,000 gallons of capacity of septic tank that when it fills up about every month, the pump truck driver comes out, pumps it all out and takes and disposes of it. And then he comes back again a month later when it's full. In other words, the water never leaves the tank. So these buyers buy the systems and they find out, well, geez, it's not a septic system, it's a holding tank, and I have to spend $350 a month to pump it out. And really, MREC was trying to figure out, is this a realtor's fault? Should they know better? And my answer was no, because there's no way that you can see underground and figure out what's going on. However, the caveat to all this is, whenever a seller has a holding tank, they're signing a piece of paper with the county, not only saying that they're going to, not put this water in the ground, but also that they're going to disclose this to the next buyer. So in this particular case, which happens often, a homeowner that has a holding tank, they think it's a septic system and they list it when they're listing their house as a septic system. It's not. A holding tank is not a septic system. It has to be listed as a holding tank, and your appraiser is going to knock down the value of that home based upon that $350 a month expense. And again, if you're doing expense or a septic inspection, you find out. But they didn't. They were rolling the dice. Maybe there's 9 other competing offers, and I get it. Sometimes you have to make concessions. And I don't know that they have repercussions in this case other than to sue the seller. And you know how that goes. It's tough.
So speaking of holding tanks, And speaking of 4,000, I know of a property and I was involved. Thankfully, I wasn't the actual in listing agent. And the pumping company, which I won't mention, Tim knows who they are, and they would come out and say, we pumped, and they were charging a little bit more than what Tim referenced. And so I got involved and I said, well, if that truck only holds 3,500 gallons, how did you pump a 4,000-gallon tank?
Yeah,
And,
like,
and
wait a
we
minute,
got
I need help with the
I
math.
said, so in essence, you're leaving 500 gallons every time you pump. Are you going to give me a discount because you only took out 3,500? And the homeowner was like, what's going on? And I said, it says right on the truck, 3,500.
Yeah.
Your tanks are 4,000. Believe me, nobody wanted to take my call after that at all. Nobody.
Right.
But
I mean, it's so easy to see some of these things and to be able to say, oh, these people are honest. But that needs to be an example of some of the companies that you're going to run into and some of the things that you're going to run into, because literally, if you're not paying attention, people are going to take advantage. We're bringing you people that are going to be honest, that
yeah,
are going to be forthcoming, and that are going to protect you if you pay the little bit of money to make sure that you're covered and that you're taken care of. John and I are both telling you, never ever waive well and septic inspections. So, but before we go far, I wanted to share with you guys before I forget, because we know I'll forget. I had a situation 2-3 years ago, maybe, where a listing agent, okay, had a house on the market that should have sold immediately because we were at the height of crazy, right? So I was like, why isn't this house selling? It was in a great neighborhood. It was actually maybe fair, maybe about 20 grand under what I would have listed it at. So I was like, what's going on? And my buyer wanted that neighborhood. And they were like, we want to buy this house. So we went out there, we looked at the house, we looked at the listing, and I'm like, oh, wait, you guys, you can't buy this house. And they're like, why? And I'm like, it has a holding tank.
yeah,
So literally, I'm like, you can't buy this 4-bedroom, 3-bath house for your family of 5 because it has a holding tank. And if you're going to pay $200, $300, $400 a month, I mean, maybe even twice a month to have it pumped, you got to know that ahead of time. What Tim is saying, guys, and let me just repeat this so everybody gets it clearly. The water, like when you do your laundry, when you flush the toilet, all the water that's coming from your house is going into a tank that is not going to go
right.
anywhere. So it's not going into a distribution box that's being put out in the yard. It's not going into a holding tank that's going to have little holes that seep into the ground. It's literally going into a tank to be pumped when it gets full. So I tried everything in my power to talk these buyers out of purchasing the house. And they're like, no, we really like the neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. So Tim's guy comes out and I'm out there. You won't believe this. It's a holding tank, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, Sue, it's not a holding tank. And I'm like, what? And he's like, it's a traditional septic tank. And I'm like, are you kidding me? He's like, no, look, so this listing agent did list the property, whether the seller told him it was a holding tank or whether he clicked the wrong button
They don't
when he
know.
was putting it online. We got a steal because literally it was listed as a holding tank. And any agent out there that's representing buyers that knew that was probably doing the same thing that I was doing, saying, wait, red flag, stop. You can't do
Yeah,
this. You can't get public sewer here. And it has a holding tank. I mean, once you're in this business long enough to know, do you want your client to pay $800 a month or God only knows what to have this thing pumped a couple times a month? That's a big red flag. So ironically, because they did the test, we found out that it was a traditional septic system. It worked perfectly fine and no harm, no foul. But God only knows what that could have cost the seller. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Honestly, nobody knows. We lucked out. We got the house, but it sat for a while before we bought it, and I guarantee you
Yeah.
that's why.
So the other
Crazy.
thing to wells, speaking of wells, not septics,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, Sue and I talked about this in one previous podcast, um, where we were talking about gallons per minute. And
Oh yeah.
Sue's point was, you're doing laundry, you're washing, you're doing this, you're doing that, right? If you have 3 or 4 kids, 5 kids, man, that tank's going to need to be pumped in 2 or 3 weeks. Um, the well on the well side, you know, I see people fill out the form, or
Yeah.
half the time it's the wrong form, like it's for the wrong jurisdiction, and I was like, that's not the form. And they want to
Right.
argue.
Right.
Um, but yeah, if you're a buyer's agent and it gives you the option, you know, I never write down I never write down to meet the state's minimum requirement of 1 gallon. I never write 1 gallon a minute. That will not cut it.
Right.
I'm
No.
usually asking for
No.
3 plus, and usually the listing agent doesn't know enough to catch me on it. This is why I brought up earlier. If we had access to the original well diggers report, like tried here, tried here, tried here, here's the one.
Yeah.
This is 350 feet deep. This is what it was producing. At least you'd have something to go off of, but we have nothing to go off of. But I don't write state minimum of a gallon. Those people will be trying to sue me.
No, right. I mean, so Tim, what do you think about that? Like not what the county says, not what the state says, not what the city says, whatever. What do you think is a good
Yeah,
gallon per
great
minute?
question. I'm going to give you a long answer to it.
Okay,
So the
please.
easy stat is the well yield number, right? And that's what we all go by because it's a scientific stat that anybody should be able to come behind me and pretty much get the same calculation if they do the test right. Baltimore County regulates it
Right.
to 1 gallon per minute. It's got to be one. However, when a buyer asks me, am I going to have enough water? I say, well, I want to look at more than just a gallon per minute yield because let's use a scenario that this is a 100-foot well that has, let's say, 50 feet of water in it and is producing 1 gallon per minute. You're going to go through that 50 gallons or that 50 feet of reserve, and that's probably about 75 gallons. You're going to go through that in a few showers, and then guess what? All you got is a gallon per minute. That's not good enough for a sink.
No.
You know. Now let's
Nope.
take the opposite of that. Let's say we have a 500-foot well, and I did a well like this last week. It was 500 feet deep. Let's say it produced 1.1 gallons per minute. Hey, 1.1 gallons per minute. Well, that's scary, right? We don't want to have 1.1 gallons per minute. But if it's a 500-foot well and it has 400 feet of reserve, now we're talking about 600 gallons. And a family of 4 will use 600 gallons in a day if they're really using water. So in that case, that 1 gallon per minute yield, I say, is okay because the reserve is so great. We're never going to experience that 1 gallon per minute. And all that 1 gallon per minute is really meant to do is replenish that well at night when they're done running water. We never, as tenants or occupants, want to get to the gallon per minute reserve. That means that we're at a constraint. We just want that gallon per minute yield to refill the reserve overnight.
So
let me.
I was going to ask:
ahead,
is there a way that is there a way that it's easy for us to kind of know what the reserve is in that particular well?
On our well yield reports, what we do, you don't always see in the report, but on the side of the Excel spreadsheet that we don't print, we calculate the number of gallons produced. So in other words, all of our inspectors should be doing this, is actually calculating reserve. We don't advertise it because reserve is a soft stat that will change with a different inspector. The yield itself won't, but the reserve could, depend on the time of year, if it just rained or whatever. But when I'm talking to a buyer, I'm going to be like, hey, in my report, I ran 800 gallons of water before I noticed it dropped down to 2 gallons per minute. So no, you won't be able to know. But once we do a well yield test, yes, you will. But we like to have some conversation with it instead of just putting the stat out there, because I feel there is more conversation than just saying you have 400 gallons of reserve.
So I want to be me, okay? And you guys are going to laugh because I have to simplify everything into Susan land where I actually understand it. So the aquifer is the rock source that's in the bottom of the house. Like the aquifer is where the water is underneath your house. So when you're working with a well, right? And this is as simple as it's ever going to get. When you're working with a well, the well actually goes all the way down into the aquifer. So correct me, you can stop me anytime when I'm wrong. when the aquifer is only 100 feet down and it's easily assessed by that pipe, your well might only be 100 feet to hit solid water, right? So that's why you would have a 100-foot well. If it's going down 500 feet, they had to go 500 feet down to tap into water. Now, if you're only producing 1 gallon per minute, and this is how my brain works, and you had to go 500 feet to get it, that's pretty scary, right? Because then if that water dries up, you've got to find another place to find water on your land. And if you don't have water, you don't have water.
Mhm.
So then your house becomes inhabitable. And this is why we're doing this podcast, so that you understand what you're buying. Now, the aquifer, and this is my challenge for you, Tim, is to be able to get me to understand this. When water is in the aquifer and it's only producing like 1 gallon per minute, why wouldn't that water, like an ant farm, why wouldn't that water find an easier route to take? Like, why?
No,
It does,
that's a good
right? Like it
question.
could.
So I'm going to kind of go back and reiterate some of the stuff you said. So below our house is soil, and then maybe 30 feet below that, we might find bedrock. In Tawnytown, you're finding bedrock at 4 feet. Other areas it's a little further down.
Okay, right.
In the bedrock is
Yeah.
cracks, just natural cracks in the bedrock that we call aquifers. They generally run more
Okay.
horizontal than vertical. And if they're running
Okay.
horizontal, we want to drill a well to basically catch that aquifer, right? And all that aquifer is
Okay.
a crack in the bedrock. And if it's a 1 gallon per minute aquifer, it means that it's just a very small crack. If it's a 10 gallon per
Yeah.
minute aquifer, well, it's a bigger crack,
Right.
So
Right.
it's really just the size of the aquifer that you hit. And when the well drillers, when they hit that aquifer, when they're drilling, they don't stop at the aquifer. They want to drill down deeper to create that reserve, because we want a
Okay.
bucket to catch that water. We don't want to pull it straight from the aquifer because, again, that reserve is important to
Mm.
us. And
I didn't know that. So see, I'm
yeah,
learning.
and that 500
There you
foot
go.
well, you're kind of right. Like if I see a 500-foot well, I'm like, okay, well, if this goes dry, the next well is probably going to have to be 700 feet deep. However, there is a benefit to a deeper well, whereas they are less prone to droughts. Wells that are 100 feet are much more prone to droughts. 2-3 month drought. If you have a 500-foot well, every other well is going to be drying up before yours because they're so consistent. And I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to try to explain why they are, but they do have a lot more vertical depth of water sitting in the aquifer. So there's just even more storage in the ground that's not actually in the hull of the well, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. And that's news I didn't know. So I learned something too. John, what do you think if you were buying a house as a purchaser, not a realtor? So take off your realtor
It's hard to
hat
take
as
the
a
hat
buyer.
off after like 40 years.
I know. So, right, like, where would you be comfortable? 3 gallons per minute?
I use
mean,
that as I try to slide that in. I'll be honest. If you're a seller out there and if you see 3 gallons a minute as a minimum, flip to page 11. It probably has my name on it. Right.
Right.
So,
yeah, there you go.
I really wish, that more information was available to the consumer on in the beginning. However, if you're not experienced or you don't have like a guy like Tim on speed dial where he can say, Tim, here's what I got. We're going to write on it, whatever. At least we can start some Q&A with the consumer, because I'm never going to say I'm the expert. I mean, I've learned like 3 things that I didn't know I don't know, we've been on for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm looking for 3.
That's
a
good.
lot of times when I show up, Tim or John will say to me, man, I'm at like 4.5 right now, and I've been running this for, a while. And I say, great. And I'm like, have you seen the customer? No, I haven't. Great. I'll go find the customer, keep testing. I
Well,
do know
so
a lady, because I got a call at Christmas time. A lady lived in Union Bridge, and it was interesting. The contract was accepted without a well and septic addendum. Never seen that before. However, the inspector, who was from far away, came out. He was doing the home inspection, the well, the septic, and the radon. I was like, wow, it's a lot for one
that's a
person to
big,
be combing through the
yeah,
house.
right?
9 hours in total.
Mm.
After 6 hours of running the water, I think he forgot. I think he forgot. He was
Oh,
running the
right.
water.
Probably at that point, yeah.
The well was dry. Took a week to get water back in the well. Enough that it wasn't coming out silty and orange.
Well, and John or Tim, isn't that a problem? Like when it goes dry is the most obvious time that it just won't start working again, right? Am I losing my
No,
mind thinking that?
no. So in most cases, right, in Baltimore County, I'm running these oil yields for 3 or 6 hours. So I will deplete that reserve, which is the goal of the test. And what should happen is, I should be able to rest the pump and then wait 15 minutes and have water again, right? At least 15 gallons. What happens in some cases is that one, you might have a very bad well which just has trouble recouping. But it sounds like, John, in this case, when we deplete that reserve, we're also depleting the aquifers, right? We kind of dried those out. And if you have an aquifer with a bunch of sediment in it, you basically just release sediment into the well. You didn't collapse it, but it's going to be trouble getting water back. It's not the fault of the well yield tester, which I've been blamed for, a few times when this has happened. Baltimore County backs me up because we're licensed through them. It's just this phenomenon kind of when you do the well. And what happens is it's usually somebody that didn't use a lot of water, right? An older couple maybe that didn't use a lot, and then somebody comes in and uses a lot, whether that's me as a well yield tester
Right.
or a family of five. So I
Yeah.
kind of defend
No, she
myself.
lived by herself.
Yeah.
She lived by herself and she worked a lot.
And then I defend myself like saying, hey, I didn't do this, and I'm just protecting this family of five that it would have happened to them. So it does take remediation sometimes in those senses. But it's the well yield that created it because we cleaned out the aquifer, but at the same time just pulled in a bunch of sediment. So it's one of those headaches that is unfortunate that makes nobody happy. And it's infrequent. You run into this because you've been doing this a while. We might have that happen once a year to ourselves. It's not a common thing, but it is a headache.
And it's important to note that if that well was producing 3, 4, 5 gallons a minute, it wouldn't be an issue. It just would never be an issue. It's those wells that are producing 1 gallon per minute that might be the minimum requirement for use and occupancy, but is it really what you can live off of? And that's why you need to educate yourself before you buy a house, guys, especially one on loans.
Yeah, I sold a property in Pasadena off of Solly, and he's got his property is far back on the road, and it's like wetlands, flood zone back there. And um, this was years ago. This is when I learned about the septic area and then the reserves. And it's an eye opener and it's helpful again. If we could get the information up front, here I'm looking at a plat after the fact. It shows where his septic is currently and where the additional reserves are on the property. And it's like you were talking about holding tanks. Ain't no reserves. It's a holding tank.
Can I speak to that for a second?
It's a holding tank.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a great point. So every time today, if a system's installed, they reserve 10,000 square feet for future septic systems, right? Every septic system fails.
Wow.
So that 10,000 square feet is room to put that second, even third system in.
Exactly.
There is a house, and I want to say it was, this was about 3 years ago. It might have been the Davidsonville area. It was close to that. And it was a small lot, and the system was working fine. I believe we passed the system, but we made a note, there's no reserve here. When this system fails, we don't know. The county is going to tell you what to do, and it could be holding tanks. It could be hooked up to sewer if it's available. Well, before the listing agent even read a report, I guess they just got a verbal. She's calling me on my cell phone saying, why are you writing this negative information? The system's working. And, I was trying to explain to her, well, this is truth. We're taught in our classes. And it was actually one of the more professional conversations I've ever had, because I had to tell the realtor that this person was asking me to hide some valuable information. And you guys know as realtors, like that's not cool. You can't do that.
Not cool.
And then I don't think she realized she was doing it, until I put in that perspective, but that's exactly what it is. A buyer needs to know this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
You got to know you got reserves. It's like we'll get it
everything.
Like somebody will say, well, why can't I put a pole barn over there? I'm like, county ain't going to approve that. Well, why not?
So
why can't I just put it up? I'm like, okay.
go ahead,
They're
right?
not going to
Like, just
approve it
don't
because
come
you
back
can't
and
have a
tell us.
permanent structure in a reserve.
And then I inspected a year later, and we're
Yeah,
saying there's a permanent structure over your reserve area. Yeah.
100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when we bring these people on to talk to you, and when we are trying to educate you, we're also learning ourselves, because realtors that are just getting started out there, John and I both learned something today, right? Like Tim taught us
I
something that
learned
we didn't know.
3 or 4 things.
Right. So I think that the most important thing that we can share with you is this information. And we want you to ask us questions. We want to be able to go back to Tim, and Tim knows I'll call him and say, Tim, this question came in. Can you answer it? These are people that we trust, that we work with regularly, that it doesn't matter if you're in Texas, Maryland, Florida. If you're a realtor and you're in this business, we want to be able to offer you this opportunity to learn, to educate yourselves, to educate your clients, and to make sure that you're protecting the people that are trusting you in this process. Is there any one particular thing, John or Tim, that you want to leave everybody with today? Like, what is the most important thing that you want to leave everybody with, Tim?
Yeah, I'd love that question. Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Well,
Can you give us a
it's my
little bit of
business,
information?
but
Okay.
the most important thing I want to get across is that people do have to, especially on the septic side, they have to maintain it. If you let it go, it's just going to cost you
Yeah.
money over time. And again, 20 years ago, it wasn't a whole lot of money. Nowadays, it's a lot of money. 10 years from now, it's going to be a whole lot more money. These systems are more
Yeah.
expensive and more innovative. And, even if it's not part of a real estate transaction, have a professional, whether it's a company like ourselves or a pump truck, make sure that you have eyes on the system.
Well, I heard Tim
Excellent.
say this earlier, and I want to touch on this. And it kind of takes me to the same thing with radon. You buy a house 3 years ago, and you had Tim test the water, and he said the water all looks good. Here's the report, blah 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 blah. Right? Don't fall on your laurels, and every so often test the water. If something significant happened in your neighborhood across the street, they put in a new golf course, because Tim mentioned that earlier. That's a reason to test. Um, you know, in radon, fans go bad. In fact, the Davidsonville property with the discharge box, I noticed when I was doing my pre-listing walkthrough, I put my hand on the pipe and I said, "Your fan's dead." How do you know? I said, "Put your hand on the pipe," right? Nothing. And so invariably, not to get off on radon, that pipe was on the side of the house that it was on the opposite side of the garage. So they never went over there. They had a guy cut their grass. They didn't know. They didn't know how long it was dead. So, test the water. Call Tim back again. It's been 5 years, Tim. Can you guys just come out and do a sample for me?
So, and guys, I want to share, and you guys are going to laugh when I bring this up, because I know you're both going to go, "Oh my God, she's right." When people hit the pipe that's sticking out of the ground and they knock the cap off, right? How many wells do we actually see that aren't sealed? They're not
Well, Sue,
sealed.
your well was
So
one of them, right? You hit it with the you
my
hit it with the
well was
lawnmower.
one of them, right? Like, go ahead, put me under the bus, Tim. But it was one of them. And there were bugs in it. There were, God only knows. And that is water that we're actually
Yeah,
drinking,
Yeah.
right? I
the
mean,
well cap. Yeah, if it
ugh.
looks broken, it probably is, and that means that moisture and bugs are getting in. And you don't want to open up a well cap and see it, because then you have nests and everything else. It's just pretty disgusting.
Yeah.
I had one in
Yeah.
Westminster.
So,
The snowplow sheared the head right
yeah,
off the well. I was
right.
like, "You didn't put anything around it? How about some rocks?"
Yeah. If your cap is broken, or, needs to be replaced, then you need to test your water, period. Like, that's just a red flag. Hey, I mean, Tim, if you don't mind sharing, if somebody wanted to test their water, that's like $100, right? Or less. I mean, how much does it cost for somebody to bring their water in and
If
have
they
it
bring it into
tested?
our lab, a bacteria sample is $50.
$50, guys, $50. If you have to go out and do a test for them, what would that
We add
cost? What would that
125
run
to the
about?
price for our trip.
Right.
So
So
when
for
Okay, so
175,
for under
folks,
$200,
listen,
your
listen.
water is tested.
Get Tim's company. If you haven't had your water tested in 5 years plus, find Tim, call, Homeland, get on the schedule, get your water tested. Even if it's good for us. Have them come out and do a sample. Even if you decide to sell a year later, the buyer may do their own test, but at least we have a basis point to start. Have the
We
water
know, right,
tested.
right.
If you don't know why your kids are chronically sick, have your water tested. Come on.
Right, right. I mean, you owe it to your children, right? I mean, when I looked at my granddaughter, and I have one, you know what I mean? So when this baby got put in my arms, I was just like, oh, what do I got to do? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I know it sounds funny, but it's a little different when your kids are grown and you're starting over again.
If you're going to go
You
out and buy
do the
three
same
baby
thing as the
gates,
grandmother.
if you're going to buy 3 baby
Yeah,
gates, have
yeah.
the water tested.
Don't feed them lead, right?
Right.
Like, don't feed them nitrogen and lead.
I had a
Let's leave it
I
a
had
little
a
bit.
sale in Imesville. I didn't know it. I didn't know that the caps are required to be sealed caps now. Found out that
Yeah,
day.
I mean, right, right, right. So I think that so with septic and with well, those are the two most important. And then Tim, if I can ask you the last question, radon. When like what why should people test for radon? Even if they are just testing now and they already own the house, why is that so important? If you could
Just
share.
like water, it's colorless and odorless. So it's one of these things you might get a false sense of confidence because you just don't notice anything. Like mold, you smell mold, you want to fix it, right? Radon,
Yeah.
you don't have that.
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
the example, in my opinion, why this is more important than it was years ago is that we are basement livers now. We were not living in basements 20 and 30 years ago, not nearly as much as we do now, but it's hard to find a house that has a basement that's not finished or not being lived in by kids, whether they're watching TV or just playing games down there. So again, small bodies that are in the basement more often, I believe it's a higher risk. And, over the last 50 years, whenever somebody died of lung cancer and they smoked one cigarette in their life, we'd say, well, that was attributed to smoking. As we see people stop smoking, I'm really interested to see how many more cases are attributed to lung cancer cases are attributed to radon.
Yeah. More than you
Yeah.
think. I
Well, I
have a
think right
family
now
friend, just like Sue. Sue had a
yeah.
client. I had a family friend. I had a listing in Sykesville. Radon came back high. They never used their basement because it was an older couple. But the
Yeah.
neighbor was a family friend, and to this day they still live in the house, have never had a radon test, and both of them have cancer.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a very sad thing, but I think that the truth is that I think it's second cause of lung cancer other than
Yeah, and
smoking.
smoking, I believe, is over attributed.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very important that you guys know this, that you guys, as realtors, as buyer's agents, are telling your buyers these facts because they don't know. How would you know? Right? This is why you get a buyer's agent. This is why a buyer's agent is so important. And we're being attacked right now. I work on both. So I'll list and work with buyers. But there's some people out there that strictly work with buyers. And there's some people out there that strictly work with sellers. And your agent, if you're buying a house and you're not working with a realtor that's going to stand by your side, you're taking all of this on yourself. Educate yourself. Listen to the podcast. If you want to not have someone represent you, you better learn through some source because, in 19 years, I have so many horror stories that we're starting a podcast.
Right.
Come on, guys. Like, we're trying to help you.
It's you're not buying jeans.
You-
There's no
No,
Amazon return policy. Like, oh, I don't like the house, so I'm gonna fold it up and send it to Amazon. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Imagine buying a
Yeah.
house as an unrepresented buyer and you put an offer in and you don't
Yeah.
have a well and septic addendum. You were like, I can't inspect this stuff, but I'm also stuck buying the house. Like, you can really get yourself in some tough spots if you don't have a professional.
And guess what, buyers? That listing agent is not going to suggest that you do these inspections. They're going to do quite the opposite because they legally represent the seller. We keep expressing how important buyer agency is. And whether I never sell another house again, I will go to my grave swearing by buyer agency. You need it. It's not an option. you know, whether you pay for it yourself, whether the seller pays for it, whether, you know, it's through a grant. God only knows what's going to happen in the future, but there's always going to be buyer representation, and we're always going to be able to find a way for you to be able to afford to be represented.
There's way
So
too
don't be
many
fooled by
moving
this.
parts.
Right. You cannot or should not do this on your own.
Yeah.
My son, not to bring this to your attention, but my son and I were having a conversation just this morning, and you know, I think it's a good thing to bring to your attention, but we were talking about the effect of the NAR lawsuit and everything that's going on, and how people are changing, and what he's hearing, you know, as a 20-year-old man is, oh, well, our price is going to come down, mom. And is this going to happen, mom? And I'm like, you know, don't believe anything that you hear right now. Nothing is changing. The law, you know, if you listen to our last podcast, we had Tom on. He's an attorney and a real estate broker here in Maryland. And he told you there is no changes right now. We cannot guess what's going to happen in the near future. We just can tell you how important buyer agency is and how you should be represented. And he asked me as part of this conversation, so do your job, like, you know, buyers, sellers out there, we're talking directly to you, not realtors right now, but do your job. Make sure by listening to these podcasts, the goal is when it comes time for you to sell your house, you're going to know what to ask. You're going to know who to ask. You're going to know how to ask. And you're going to know what's important for you in your sale or your purchase.
Yeah, and we're gonna tag Tim, and if you
Yes.
think you might want to test your water, you'll be able to connect right to Tim. You can also look him up. There's a thing called Google. I heard it
Yes.
works pretty well. And get your water tested. Get your water tested. No surprises.
Absolutely. And if this, you know, if you do decide to test your water because you listen to this podcast, whether you're in California, Florida, whatever, please let us know, because we do want to know that what we're doing is helping.
Yeah.